Hello, my friends. In today's video, we're going to go over some more of the nitty-gritty details with regard to the interior design of your book. So again, when we're talking interior design, we're talking about how your words look on the page, not necessarily the words that you chose or in what order those words appear in. That's going to be dealt with in the editing phase, but how everything looks when it's on the page, especially in hard copy books. So the reason that we're spending time talking about this is, number one, if you are doing this yourself, you need to have a good grasp on what you're doing. And number two, if you're hiring a professional, you need to have a good grasp on the terms and what they're going to be focusing their efforts on so that you can work with them efficiently. But overall, the main goal when we're talking about the interior design of a book is readability and enjoyability for your readers. You want your readers to enjoy reading your book on multiple levels. If something is obnoxious about the way it looks, they're not going to be able to get over that very well in order to just focus on the words. So you want to make sure that it looks good so they enjoy it. And those small details are really what helps bring a book home to good. Something that they can tell, here's the thing. You probably won't even be able to tell when a book feels good or looks good because it's very seamless and behind the scenes. All this work is done to make it appear that nothing was done, if you know what I mean. The spacing and the line, the line justification and all of that. It's not obvious to the reader's eye that something was done because it looks good. So in the opposite, if something, if none of this was adjusted and things were left a little funky, that's what the readers will see. They won't see the good stuff, they'll see the bad stuff. So it's those small details that make it look smooth, look like a professional, cohesive piece, and help them really enjoy the actual story and get past all the small details, because that's really what it is. We want it to look good in a way that doesn't distract them, in a way that feels good to read, but allows them to get into the story without trying to figure out why there's an extra space or why that word was way over here or why the hyphen was in the wrong place. All of that needs to be adjusted so that they aren't distracted. So we are going to talk about some nitty gritty. We're going to zoom in and talk about a couple of key elements when discussing the concept of book design, interior book design. The first term I want to bring to your attention is typography. Typography. It's something we're going to talk about more in a future video because it is important. But it's talking essentially about typefaces, which is what you have most likely been calling font. Something like Times New Roman, Garment, Calibri, all of that. Those are called typefaces. Again, we're going to talk more about this. And font styling, which is bold, italics, the size of the actual letters. So typography is one of those things that can be a little genre specific. Some genres do different things for different reasons. So we're going to focus in on what memoir does, or in general nonfiction, but typically we're going to be looking at memoir because it is its own genre for a reason. I know it's within the nonfiction category, but I consider it something a little bit different than standard nonfiction books. So typography is what we're going to dive into more deeply into a future video. But just be aware that these are elements that you need to pay attention to. Something else that you're going to want to look at and research before you finalize the interior design of your book. At some point, you're going to want to consider whether or not you want a book with running heads. What that is, if you open up one of your favorite books, you'll most likely see a running head. It will be a header on each page, and sometimes, like on the left page, it'll say the author's name or the book title, and on the other page, on the right side, it will say the chapter name or the book's title or something. So usually on the left and right sides, the left and right pages, they'll have different running heads, two different ones. And they call them running because they run throughout the book. Now, If you have a chapter running head, you are obviously going to only have that chapter name per chapter. The next chapter will have its own chapter title in the running head. If you have an author running head, author name, it's going to run throughout the entire book. Book title, that's going to run throughout the entire book. So sometimes these vary. There isn't one right way or wrong way to do it. For some reason, I tend to prefer the book title. And I think because in my mind, a title is supposed to kind of tell us something about the theme, right? It's supposed to tell us, well, what is this book really about? Well, what is the meaning behind this title? When I'm doing a developmental edit, I try to pay attention to the title, but not in a way that tells me how the book is going to go. In a way that has me question, do I get this feel in the book from the title name, right? So if I'm reading this book and I'm like, what was the title again? And the title doesn't seem to match, I bring that up to the author. So to have a running head of the title allows me to take my thinking back to the title. If I'm reading something and I'm going, what does this have to do with something? I'm going to wonder, well, what was the title? Or the chapter title. The chapter title can kind of do the same thing. So maybe author name is the lowest value to the reader. It might be a little ego thing. Maybe you want your name on every page. That's totally fine. But maybe you have the book title and the chapter title. So that could just be a personal preference. Maybe you only want the running head on the right side. Maybe you only want the running head on the left side. Maybe you just want the book title on every side. There again is no right or wrong answer. It is author stylistic preference, and if you're working with a professional, they may tell you this is what they see most in your genre, which will take me back to my number one piece of advice. Go ahead and just research your genre and, books in your genre. So research other memoirs and see what they're doing. See what they've done. See what maybe you as a reader might have picked up before. Think about how you as a reader might interact with that book and how those running heads and these other features I'm talking about could bring you some value or some help or whatever it is. And same thing with footers. Most of the time you're going to have a page number in the footer, right? How big is that? How big is the font in the footer? Is it centered on the page? Is it on the right or the left? Is there some type of design element there? Is it spelled out for some reason, or is there some other information there? Those are the types of things that you're looking for within some examples to give you an idea of what you'd like. And again, always take it back to genre. If you can't find a ton of memoir to look at, go ahead and look at nonfiction. You could kind of see if there's a difference between nonfiction and fiction. I suppose memoir is maybe a little bit more fiction in my head when it comes to style, because a novel is essentially a big long story that we're going to be telling. Same with memoir. Typically, what a novel and a memoir have in common, they have in common in the opposite ways to nonfiction. For example, nonfiction will have a lot of charts and graphs and a lot of headings and bullet points and that type of thing, because it's typically personal development or self-help, and you're learning about something and it's putting it into more of a, I'm going to tell you this and I'm going to summarize it in these bullet points, and then we're going to go over here and I'm going to show you this in a chart to help you learn. In a memoir or a novel, you're just reading this flow of content, this flow of a story. So it's going to have similar design elements in that context. However, there are differences. So do try to find memoir for your examples. Another thing you're going to want to pay attention to, and again, these are the details that you're going to want to seek out some insights on before you start typesetting your book, which is what we're talking about. We'll talk about typesetting in another video as well, are what we call ornamental scene breaks. These are the little dots or dashes or swooshes or leaves or little doobie dads. I don't know what to call them. Little icons, little ornaments, right? That break your scenes. They're not what you might see in the chapter number or heading, like a little ornament there. We're talking about within a chapter when the scene breaks. Probably the most common is going to be like three little asterisks or a dash or some type of just line, if you will. I have seen books use like a little line drawing of a leaf or maybe a swirl or something to the effect. This is where you can kind of get a little creative with the style, and in a memoir without illustrations or without images, this might be one of the few places you can get creative with style. So scene breaks themselves are very important for the flow of your book, and they add a little extra white space, and they're visually appealing for the readers. If you have very long, dense chapters, you're going to want to see if there are some scene breaks you can insert, because think about it when you're reading a book. If you're going like, okay, I have 15 minutes, but you want to end somewhere logical, it's usually a scene break if you can't get through a full chapter, right? So these little ornamental scene breaks are going to be a visual cue. They're going to have some white space. They're going to be really just a kind of a nice little touch for the readers. And then you want to consider line spacing. Are you spacing them out single lines, double lines, 1.25, whatever it is? And then you're going to consider widows and orphans. These are some things we're going to go over further. Widows and orphans, consider how you're leaving the content at the end of the page and how it's trailing to the beginning of the next page. So you want to make sure that the readers are able to read in a very cohesive, flowy, continuity. They don't want anything mixing up their reading mind, right? They don't want to get anything in the way. And then white space, you've heard me talk about that already in this video. It's something that works very visually well for the readers. They don't want too many words all over the place. It's too cluttered. But white space should be also considered in the context of what's called rags and gutters. We've talked about gutters a little bit, but the gutters are on basically in the margin, and they're on the inside of your book. You want the gutters to not be too big so that there's too much white space, and all of a sudden you have like a 2-inch gutter and you have like 3 inches of text. That would look really awkward. So you want to make sure your gutters are adjusted accordingly to not be too much, but to be enough. There is a bit of an art form here. Rags, what that is, I think of like if you tear a piece of paper on the right side, you're going to have like a jagged edge, right? So if you have text that is not justified, meaning the lines are even on both margins, but they're left aligned, meaning they're straight on the left, but they're jagged on the right. It's like that torn piece of paper. It's jagged. They call it a rag. Some of that white space is, because it's uneven, is difficult for the eye. It's not as enjoyable. It's not as flowy, if you will. The justification where the lines are the same width and, they go from margin to margin all the way down, except for the indents maybe on the first line of a paragraph, that is enjoyable for the eye. That's easy for the eye to read. So you want to make sure that you take that into consideration. Again, we're going to talk more about some of these concepts in future videos as we dive in deeper. You also want to watch to make sure that the space around the chapter headings are not too much and not too narrow, if you will, or too short. A chapter heading should usually take up about 1/3 of the page, so you don't want it to start like in the middle or way up at the top. It's just, again, it's about the presentation and the design of the page. So white space comes into consideration in many different contexts, so you want to pay attention to this. Do a little research in your favorite books or in more recent memoirs, and do some Google searching on what they might recommend in specific, whatever specific program you're using. Microsoft Word can work for some of this, and we're going to talk about programs as well. So then you want to consider whether or not you have any images. Typically memoirs do not, but if they do, you want to consider how the white space works around that image. If you have any little description of the image there, a little caption, there we go, thank you. Thank you, brain. If you have a little caption, how do you present that text and all of that? So those are the bigger a bigger picture of the nitty-gritty elements that you're going to want to look at, and we're going to get deeper into this. Okay, we're going to talk about typography and you know, more of that, the regs and all of that in future videos, but start thinking about these things. There is sources that I use a checklist with my clients when we do formatting. What are the things that you want? We kind of run through all of this so that the formatter knows how to present the text on the page. The book designer knows. These, you know, professionals will have resources like that. If you're doing it on your own, you're going to have to create something that works for you, right? So go to your more, again, you're going to hear me say this, go to your fave books, pull off the books from the shelf, see what they have in common, see what you like, see what you don't like. Do they use a border line in the running head? Do they use a little swirly thing for your ornamental section breaks? How do they present the chapter titles? How do they present the chapter numbers? That type of thing. You want to look for those visual design elements to see what you like so you can help translate that to your readers, okay? So that's a little introduction on where you should start, and we're going to continue this discussion and get a little bit more detailed as we go. So please come back for future videos, and I will see you there.